Hello and welcome to the Andreas Gursky exhibition at the Museum der Bildenden Künste Leipzig. We are pleased to explore the complex work of this internationally renowned photographer with you. This audio guide will provide insights into the artist's approach and present select works in detail. The artist himself will also say a few words and explain the inspiration behind certain works and the technical devices he uses to implement his ideas. Andreas Gursky planned this exhibition, his first institutional show in his hometown of Leipzig, as a very personal review of his work with more than 60 photographs from a time span of over 35 years. The exhibition combines well-known major works and new works that have never before been presented in a museum context. Thank you to all our supporters for making this exhibition possible, most importantly the Ostdeutsche Sparkassenstiftung, Sparkasse Leipzig, and the Förderer des Museums der Bildenden Künste Leipzig. In addition, we would like to thank the funding program NEUSTART of the federal government's Commissioner for Culture and Media and all those involved. Without close collaboration and intense exchanges with the artist, his studio in Düsseldorf, and the Berlin gallery Sprutmagers, the exhibition and the audio guide would not have been possible, and for that we owe them our very special thanks. Introduction. The photographer Andreas Gursky stands for a creative approach to the technological possibilities of the digital age and a striking awareness of the urgent social and political issues of our times. He is enthusiastically open to the possibilities offered by digital image editing, without abandoning the documentary link to reality. His range of motives is astonishingly broad, ranging from monumental architecture in remote parts of the world to a piece of carpeting on the floor of Kunsthalle Düsseldorf. Andreas Gursky, Early Life and Training. Andreas Gursky was born in Leipzig in 1955 and grew up in Düsseldorf. Both his father Willy and his grandfather Hans Gursky had already run their own photography studios in Taucher and Leipzig. In 1977, Gursky began his studies at Essen's Folkwang Universität der Künste before switching in 1980 to Kunstakademie Düsseldorf, where he studied with Bernd Becher until his graduation in 1987. From 2010 to 2018, he was a professor himself at the renowned art school. Andreas Gursky now lives and works in Düsseldorf and Ibiza. The development of contemporary photography in Germany and around the world is quite closely tied to the Art Academy in Düsseldorf, and especially the influence of Bernd and Hilla Becher. In 1976, Bernd Becher was named the first professor for artistic photography at a West German art school. The joint work of this artist couple, which is exemplary for both its precise documentary view and for being open to contemporary artistic practices, formed the foundation of the so-called Düsseldorf School of Photography. Although the term is rather controversial in light of the artistic independence of the Becher's former students, the highly productive surroundings undoubtedly influenced Andreas Gursky over the long term. On this foundation, he developed a view of the world that was all his own, and his own way of implementing motifs and rendering images unmistakable through their further treatment. Artistic approach and themes. Andreas Gursky takes the work of his teacher Bernd Becher, his documentary gaze and expressive approach to art, as a point of departure and adapts it to our time. In doing so, he uses his surroundings to explore the structures and contexts of the material world and our relationship to it. The locations and incidents he finds become the basis for his works. He then creates images using digital editing in which he amplifies those aspects of the motive that he considers important and subtly alters reality and its perception. This way of working becomes especially clear in his architectural photography, one of the most important subjects in Gursky's work. It goes far beyond a mere act of registering the world around him. For Gursky, the buildings and their surroundings are the starting point for images that he often constructs using several individual photographs. Architectural patterns with apparently endless repetition become almost abstract graphic structures in which the individual human being could only disappear. This effect is amplified in that the photographer frames his motifs so that they seem to extend endlessly in all directions. Andreas Gursky sums up this way of working by saying that the only way to actually depict reality is to construct it. At a time when digital photography was seen merely as a technological innovation and was largely regarded with suspicion in the art world, Andreas Gursky recognized that the new technology and above all the possibilities of digital visual editing demanded entirely new visual concepts. He recalls,
At some point I realized that analog photography for me has its limits and that digitalization opened up whole new possibilities for me and that I wanted to use them.
Gursky thus belonged to a group of photographers in the 1990s who processed their photographs digitally and produced their photographs in oversized formats. Over the years, he appropriated a wide repertoire of visual forms of expression which he uses depending on the respective visual task at hand.
Basically, I can say that for me, any approach that leads to a good result is fine, whether I just take a snapshot more or less unintentionally, or whether I undertake an elaborate staging here in my studio. There are all sorts of possibilities, there's a wide spectrum available, and on the basis of the experience that I've gathered over the 35 years of my career, I decide from picture to picture which is the right technique to use.
Andreas Gursky takes photographs all over the world. He thus engages with the changed visual habits of the digital age and the challenges of globalized capitalism, such as climate change, the exploitation of natural resources, or precarious working conditions. All the same, the artist does not see himself as a social critic. Instead, he wants to preserve a public awareness of these subjects without losing sight of the beauty and complexity of the world. So let us keep our eyes open. We hope you enjoy your tour of the exhibition and are inspired by it. 99¢. Chocolate bars in blue, yellow, or orange. Round cookies, rectangular cookies, juice in cans, juice in plastic bottles, juice in cartons, and all of this reflected on the ceiling. A huge world of commodities spreads out before us. The 99-cent store where this picture was taken can be found in Los Angeles, but the concrete location plays no role at all. The anonymous title, 99¢, refers instead to the omnipresence of consumer culture around the world. Although we are all familiar with places like this, we rarely truly perceive them. The overwhelming format of this work from 1999 makes it possible for us to immerse ourselves in the diversity of detail. At the same time, the high vantage point of the photographer generates a sense of a general overview and distance. This results in an almost abstract image, exemplary for the oeuvre of the artist as a whole. Gursky remastered this work in 2009, remaster being a term from the realm of music and video production. In this context, this means that the shots that Gursky used to create a first version of the image on the computer, originally taken as analog photographs in 1999, were rescanned and digitally edited once again 10 years later with improved technology. The greater depth of field and intensified brilliance of color amplified the desired effect even more. Chicago Board of Trade III. At first glance, the activity seems chaotic. The side tiers are grouped around the central octagon like an arena. The pit is the heart of the Board of Trade in Chicago. With his familiar precision for detail, Andreas Gursky observed this dramatically packed scene of hectic activity in 2009. While the image does not decode the laws and the rules of the game in operation at this location, it does demonstrate their complexity in an impressive way. Those familiar with the stock exchange and so-called floor trading can find all the typical processes of this world represented in this picture. In recent years, the practice has become history. Most sales are now done using computers, with the result that much fewer people work on the stock exchange. With Chicago Board of Trade III, Andreas Gursky created a document of the pre-digital era. Lehmbruck I. A typical museum space in the modern age. Various sculptures are loosely distributed in a concrete glass structure. The building with a glazed sculptural courtyard is a real place. Duisburg's Lehmbruck Museum, an icon of West German post-war modernism from 1964, now getting on somewhat in years. But what is unsettling about this composition? Instead of depicting a found spatial situation, Andreas Gursky here worked as a curator and created a fictional exhibition with the help of digital photo editing. When the artist visited the museum in Duisburg in 2013, he was struck by the emptiness of the main exhibition hall. He decided to use the space in new ways. The sculpture, Der Gestürzte, a work by Wilhelm Lehmbruck, the artist after whom the museum was named, is actually on view in the museum courtyard behind glass. Many of the other works, like the Neanderthal with a club by Katharine Fritsch, the bronze figure of a man with the 2 gas canisters by Neo Rauch, or the woman walking down a stairway far in the background, a large format painting by Gerhard Richter, came from other collections. Andreas Gursky goes even further in this game of confusion and adds additional figures where the line separating art and life blurs. The artist thus demonstrates that photography has long distanced itself from its role of depicting reality and has itself become a truly creative art. It actually creates the reality it depicts. Königsbergerstraße, Diptych and A und E. Andreas Gursky's diptych Königsbergerstraße represents an intimate, unusually playful mood. Instead of the expansive landscapes or impressive structures typical of the artist, the 2-part work shows a woman in a domestic setting. The photograph is similar to private snapshots familiar from social media platforms. But when we look more closely, we discover key themes from Gursky's overall work like architecture, time, and the tension between composed visual space and the narrative potential of the motif. Gursky here introduces an almost surreal playfulness. The woman has placed a cardboard box over her head and is standing on the sofa and stretching out her arm to the tip of a tower of building blocks. She reaches across and tries to place one last wood block on top. The photographer leaves us intentionally unaware of how the situation came about and how it will be resolved. It's left to our imagination whether the tower is completed or collapses. Similarly unusual, the work A und E from 2020 is a private portrait of a woman with a newborn baby. The gentle light and the intimacy of the composition open a perspective that is new for us in Gursky's visual world, posing questions pertaining to the communication of intimacy, the approach to time, and the narrative potential of photography. Utah. The bizarre red rock formations in the U.S. state of Utah are familiar from countless films and photographs. In this work from 2017, Gursky takes up the cultural coding of the landscape as the epitome of the American West. On a road trip across the country, he took photographs with his mobile phone from the moving car as sketches for the later high-resolution work. The primarily creative device in this photograph is a lack of focus due to movement. What we would ordinarily interpret as a technical mistake opens a new dimension of visual experience in Andreas Gursky's work. The horizontal movement generates an impression of speed and allows the motive to blur. In this way, the objectivity of what is depicted is lost and our imagination is inspired to fill this gap with our own associations. Tokyo. On one of his many train rides across Japan, Andreas Gursky was fascinated by the painterly aspect of Tokyo's skyline as it rushed by. Due to the lack of focus resulting from the movement, the buildings become color fields and fuse to form an abstract visual composition. To arrest this impact, the photographer took the same train along the same route from Tokyo main station to one of the suburbs over and over again, capturing the metropolis in photographs as it raced by. Later, in his studio, he filtered out the pictures he found especially interesting from the hundreds of individual shots taken and reassembled them anew on the computer. Even if individual details are still prominently in focus, the image is more reminiscent of a painting than a photograph. In this picture, Gursky freezes the fast-paced lifestyle of our era. Our globalized world requires society to be mobile. In high-tech Japan, unlimited mobility seems especially optimized. More than 40 million passengers each day use the network of rail lines in the Tokyo metropolitan area, the densest rail network in the world. Untitled I. Discover the large in the small. On viewing this section of a carpet floor photographed by Andreas Gursky, one might think the view was from a great height. Even if ultimately there is no question that this is a carpet, Gursky refrained from giving the 1993 work a title to keep the spaces of association as open as possible.
The grey picture, the carpet picture, that is Düsseldorf's Kunsthalle. I could call it Kunsthalle Düsseldorf, but that wouldn't really correspond to my idea for the picture, because it shouldn't be a concrete description of the location, but rather reflect the surface of a random carpet that we have all stepped on somewhere, at an insurance company, at a bank.
Andreas Gursky achieved a similar effect in the other works in this loose series. For example, in Untitled III from 1996, he photographed a gravel floor, but it could also be the moon's surface. Paris, Montparnasse. Paris, Montparnasse from 1993 shows a patterned facade, behind which 750 apartments are located in a single building on 17 floors. 2,000 people live in the gigantic Parisian housing estate Bahrain. Designed by the French architect Jean Dubuisson, based on the model of Swiss architect Le Corbusier, this complex in Montparnasse is typical of the 1960s. The huge format of the photograph addresses the overwhelming dimensions of the building. Gursky allows us to look into each individual apartment and to discover details, enabling the gaze to wander around the image without ever defining a center. The building is cut off on the left and on the right, and so it seems that it could continue on endlessly. Gursky achieved this effect by selecting 2 shots, taken from 2 different positions from a hotel opposite, and combining them on the computer to form a single image. We thus see the building in a way that could never be actually perceived on site. The photograph registers each section of the facade with the same exactitude, like a scanner, while the human eye always has to focus on a single point. Paris, Montparnasse recalls how Gursky was influenced by the documentary architectural photography of Bernd and Hille Becher. But he moves much further away from the original motive, emphasizing the graphic structures by way of composition and his choice of framing, thus creating a nearly abstract image. At the same time, he contrasts the macrocosm of the building with fascinating insights into the microcosm of each individual apartment. This results in a work that is both abstract and figurative, objective and narrative. Untitled 19 from the series Untitled 18 to 21. Horizontal ribbons of color in apparently endless repetition, the 4 works from the Untitled series from the years 2015 and 16 take up the familiar subject of proximity and distance in viewing an image. From a distance, the photographs allude to the color field paintings of Mark Rothko or Barnett Newman. Details move to the background in favor of structure and color. In Untitled 19, we initially see largely abstract pink surfaces. It's only upon closer inspection that we realize what we're actually seeing are fields with millions of tulips. For Andreas Gursky, his medium is closest to painting when it works with abstraction. On the one hand, photography can never really be abstract, since it's based on figurative motifs. All the same, the photographic artist is inspired by the possibilities of achieving painterly effects by way of digital processing. Amazon. The company Amazon was founded in 1994 as an online bookstore in the state of Washington. Today, the market leader in internet retail has over 90 locations around the world. In the photograph from 2016, with the simple title, Amazon, the photographer provides a view of a dispatch center in Phoenix, Arizona. But this image of the seemingly endless pile of commodities could have been found at any other location, including the dispatch center in Leipzig. The perspective chosen by the photographer provides a virtually supernatural view. The visual format and the great focus on detail allow us to recognize each individual article down to the very last shelf. To achieve this effect, Andreas Gursky photographed each shelf individually and later montaged the pictures digitally, capturing the essence of consumerism in an aesthetic image. Around the world, Amazon is increasingly subject to serious criticism because the global company is seen as representing exploitative turbo-capitalism, low salaries, and a rigid personnel policy. Gursky includes the motto that can be found all over the entrance area to the Phoenix plant in his work. It reads, "Work hard, have fun, and make history." It remains an open question whether the fun and hard work are equitably distributed. Kreuzfahrt. In this work from 2020, Andreas Gursky explores the subject of cruises on ocean liners, which have long lost the luxurious charm they once might have had, not least due to their devastating impact on the climate. The picture shows the Norwegian Bliss, which was launched at the shipyard Meyer Werft in Lower Saxony in 2018. Gursky photographed the ship in various phases of its construction. During the subsequent digital treatment, adding segments of a second ship and thus achieving a degree of abstraction that allows an entirely new object to emerge. He thus gave the digital ship a different name, and christened it Norwegian Rhapsody. The photographer does not show the vessel as the cruise line or a travel agent might. He forefronts neither the power and speed of the machines nor the various possibilities of leisure and relaxation on offer. The wide format of the picture he chooses, with an endless series of individual elements, recalls his work Paris, Montparnasse from 1993. The wealth of detail compels our gaze to quickly turn away from the large picture to look at particular segments of the image. The actual appearance of the gigantic ship is only revealed by this approach. The manufacturing process is still visible. Foils and cables can be seen hanging. Only a few of the cabins seem ready to be used. But where are the people doing the work? Only on closer inspection can we make out at least two people who seem tiny in comparison to the immense structure. In Kreuzfahrt, just as in Paris Montparnasse, Gursky creates a view of the motive that is impossible to see in real life by combining several shots from various perspectives. SH1, SH4. Superheroes fly, superheroes climb. They also fight and save people. That's what we're used to from Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, or Iron Man, the American comic figures from the mid-20th century. Just 10 years ago, the superheroes underwent a spectacular comeback thanks to the series of Marvel films, not just as comic figures, but as action film heroes. Andreas Gursky's 4-part series of superheroes from 2014 marks a new phase in the artist's oeuvre. He now took the next step from post-processing of photographed reality toward the construction of reality. At the same time, he added a narrative element. The heroes have become tired. Or are they simply longing for a return to ordinary life? SH1 shows Iron Man in pink, glowing beach surroundings. In SH4, Spider-Man is standing in his characteristic red-blue suit opposite his alter ego in the film, the actor Tobey Maguire, in front of the famous Maison Hermès in Tokyo. Does the immobile silence with which Gursky depicts his figures symbolize the end of the age of superheroes? Politik II. Over several months, Andreas Gursky followed roll call votes in the German parliament with his camera and intensely observed the members of the Bundestag living out parliamentary democracy. Politik II from 2020 shows a series of high-ranking German MPs. As in a classical representation of the Last Supper, 13 people are engrossed in animated conversations. The lower edge of the image can be interpreted as a stand-in for a long table. Only one person turns away, looking at a newspaper. Ed Ruscha's painting, 11 from the year 1989, seems to sway over the heads of the politicians. Even if it's not yet 5 to 12 in this picture, the long bamboo rod that divides the painting in the background seems like the sword of Damocles swaying over the heads of the deputies. Andreas Gursky describes the scene as a humorous reminder of the duties of the people's representatives and how quickly time passes. In the series of photographs focusing on politicians, Politik II picks up directly from Andreas Gursky's work Rückblick from 2015, which shows the last 4 still living chancellors of Germany at the time the work was created. The artist is currently working on an additional work involving politicians. Prada II. A room with a minimalistic design. On the pink-colored floor, we see a wall in which the 3 shelves with pink floors are inserted. They are illuminated by invisible lamps. The wall of shelves is not freestanding, but juts into the ceiling, a subtle and elaborate staging. But what is the purpose of this glowing, empty space, reminiscent of a shrine? In Prada II from 1997, the decisive element is lacking, the commodity. A year before, Gursky had photographed Prada I in a real fashion store with decoratively presented shoes. The artist explains the creative process that led him from the first to the second image as follows.
That's how it is sometimes. You create a picture and continue thinking about it, arriving at other versions, and that's how I came up with the idea that it's not a real place that I photographed, but one that I built in my studio. And yes, that empty shelf, whether sweaters, t-shirts or shoes, is really irrelevant. It's more about the presentation of the goods, and that's why I decided to show the empty shelf.
In Prada II, instead of luxury shoes or handbags, all we can see is what is ordinarily used to present the objects of desire in their best light, but ideally by remaining invisible. The staging of the commodity becomes the actual motive of the image. Gursky was one of the first artists to turn towards contemporary forms of staging that are intended to communicate to customers the sense of belonging to a small, exclusive circle. And so, already in 1997, the photographer drew attention to an aesthetic that since then has made its way into countless retail outlets and has become natural for us. Ocean II. A blue of beguiling beauty and unfathomable depth. No painter would have been better able to capture the ocean in its original power and vulnerability than Andreas Gursky did in this digitally treated photograph. As Andreas Gursky explains, the image itself is actually impossible.
It can't be natural simply because the Earth is round and not a platform. So, due to the curvature of the Earth, these distances could not be seen at the same time, the continents, because they would simply disappear in part. And so, this is a fiction and not a real depiction. Besides that, of course, the ocean could never be entirely cloudless.
We aren't used to seeing the ocean at the center of a depiction. In human perception, the seas are spaces between the continents. They are flown over and crossed by boat, but rarely considered centers of our world. Here, the standard relationship is reversed. The land masses are pushed to the edges of the image. All the same, we need them to establish our sense of orientation. Trained by viewing atlases, weather maps, and Google Earth, we can gain our bearings. The Greenland ice shelf juts into the image at the top. On the right, next to it is Iceland. Newfoundland is on the left, and on the right, the West Sahara on the coast of northern Africa. Gursky explains how he came up with the idea of focusing on oceans in the 6-part series from 2010.
It struck me during a flight from Dubai to Melbourne. When watching the monitors showing the current location of the plane during a night flight, abstract images appear where all we see is water. That's what triggered me to work on this subject.
Pyongyang I. We find ourselves in a stadium in Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. Thousands of dancers are lined up like toy figures. Over their heads, the young women are holding red and white pom-poms like those used by American cheerleaders. Behind them is a large globe lined by dancers dressed in white. Thousands of school children are in the stands with colorful cardboard cards that they hold up in the air upon the command of the conductor, resulting in a closed monumental surface behind which they disappear. Each participant thus becomes a pixel of an oversized image. Here, too, the color red dominates, a symbol of communism absorbing all individuality. Pyongyang I belongs to a 7-part series that was created in 2007 and deals with the Arirang Festival, one of the central annual propaganda events of the communist regime in North Korea that takes place each May 1st. The impression of a symbiosis between the leadership and the people is to be conveyed by making each individual part of an oversized staging of the historic achievements of the People's Republic. It is striking that Gursky shows neither the dictator nor the communist slogans. He focuses instead on the masses of human beings and their participation in the overwhelming production. Gursky tells how he received permission to attend the event and to take photographs.
We first tried using the official channels by way of the Foreign Office, but that failed, and so I thought it would never happen. And then my assistant found this ad from a man in Cologne who simply had a thing for North Korea and was allowed to operate small tours in the country. And we asked through him whether we could take photographs. We didn't get outright permission, but he signaled to us that we'd figure something out using his contacts. And so we arranged that all on site, but it was on the whole a positive experience. One might have expected that it would not at all have been possible on site, that everything would have to be applied for, and that it wouldn't have worked if it hadn't been approved beforehand, but it was just the other way round.
Hong Kong Shanghai Bank II, Hong Kong Shanghai Bank III. Andreas Gursky photographed the headquarters of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation Limited for the first time in 1994. He returns to the motif in the 2020 series Hong Kong Shanghai Bank. Designed by the British architect Norman Foster, the iconic building has been a decisive contribution to the skyline of Hong Kong Island since 1986. One of the building's outstanding characteristics is the striking, largely external support structure. All spatial structures inside the 183-meter-high building are anchored in the skeleton-like steel construction. This construction ensures that daylight can penetrate the structure particularly well. Feng Shui principles were implemented during construction. The hustle and bustle of the streets of the city, where the line separating night and day blurs, is reflected on the facade. A sea of colorful umbrellas with slogans from the so-called umbrella movement can be seen. The protests in 2014 were directed against the Chinese government's seizure of new powers and demanded free elections and the protection of Hong Kong's special status. The umbrellas of the demonstrators not only offer shelter from the sun and the rain, but also from the pepper spray used by the police. In Hong Kong Shanghai Bank III, huge horizontal banners with slogans cover the entire facade of the building, slogans pertaining to then-current events. And yet, the general validity of many of the terms triggers chains of associations that remove the slogans from any temporal placement. Apple. For the work Apple from 2020, Andreas Gursky photographed the company's new headquarters in the Californian city of Cupertino. As in a museum, products from various generations are placed on pedestals lined up along the curved window facade of the futuristic building, a form of presentation that grants these objects of consumer desire the status of artworks. With this work, Gursky sought to express the pioneering innovation and stylistic formative aesthetic of the company in an exemplary way. In Apple, Gursky explores power structures, economic monopolization, and other dark sides of the age of information. He thus returns to issues he dealt with in his Prada images from the years 1996 and 97, when he already explored the staging of consumer goods in an aesthetic fashion. Schweine I. At first glance, Andreas Gursky's photograph Schweine I from 2020 seems like a detail from one of the survey pictures so typical of his work. Only upon closer inspection does the depth reveal itself. The photographer entered the barn of an organic farmer from southern Germany almost at eye level with the animals. He thus came so close to them that the individual bristles can be seen. The pig in the middle of the image, which has burrowed its way down into the golden straw, seems at first glance like an abstract pink shape. Only upon closer inspection do we see the fine network of blood vessels that are visible beneath the pink skin. Details like the ear marks and other individual characteristics of the animals only gradually come to the forefront. Andreas Gursky takes a clear position in the current debate on the relationship between human being and animal. What could ethically justifiable breeding and animal husbandry look like beyond the factory farming common today? Despite all the emotionality, the photographer preserves his distance and doesn't slip into kitsch. Bauhaus. We all know them. But nobody really looks at them. The buildings that look like shoeboxes that shape our urban peripheries. In their book, Learning from Las Vegas, from 1972, to this day a foundational work on architecture in the postmodern city, Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown call such buildings decorated sheds. Architecturally exchangeable, they are only distinguishable by the respective company logo or trademark, which also serves as an oversized advertisement. Gursky explores these omnipresent symbols of brand consumption in his work Bauhaus from 2020. Thematically speaking, he returned to his work Toys R Us from 20 years before. In the current work, the artist shows the large hardware store in a cool, nearly abstract aesthetic that vaguely recalls the modernist architecture of the Bauhaus. The photographer constructs this dramatic contrast quite intentionally, for the successors of the Bauhaus, the famous school of architecture and design, had failed to claim the rights to the name. Heinz Georg Baus, the founder of the chain of hardware stores, secured the rights to the name in 1960. Until today, the ambiguity of the supposedly unique brand name is still unsettling. Rhein III. The photograph Rhein III from 2018 returns to Gursky's famous work Rhein II, created in 1999. In the earlier work, the photographer had already removed all details that could indicate the motif's concrete geographic location. There are no human beings, animals, buildings, ships, power pylons, trees, or bushes visible in the picture. Instead, we are confronted with an almost abstract image of this legendary river, consisting of a meadow, a paved path along the riverbank, the river, the sandy shoreline, a green embankment, and an overcast sky, arranged strictly parallel to one another. The photographer has removed all things that would otherwise upset this scheme and thus achieves a striking minimalist composition. Both photographs were taken during the summer months. The setting and composition in the two are virtually identical. And all the same, the mood has changed dramatically in comparison to the earlier image. The fresh green has now disappeared. The once lively Rhine landscape now lies barren before us. The grass burned in shades of ochre. The river surface looks like poured concrete, the sky gray and oppressive. The drought in the summer of 2018 caused the river's water level to drop to a record low and severely affected fauna and flora. The new image has become a dystopia and seems like a contribution to current debates on climate change. Ruhrtal. A highway bridge spans across the Ruhr Valley on towering concrete pillars. It blocks the sky like a black beam and continues towards both sides, apparently infinite. Already in this early work from 1989, Andreas Gursky uses the effect of seeming endlessness that we also frequently encounter in later works. The image, which appears to be virtually abstract, is animated by a single human figure, a man wearing a winter jacket and holding a folding chair that can be made out in the midst of the monumental landscape from a distance. The photographer is not interested in the individual, but in human beings in general and their relationship to the surroundings they shape. Salerno. Andreas Gursky has a penchant for repetitive structures. This work from 1990 shows the harbor of Salerno, with hundreds of new cars awaiting shipment. Behind them, we can make out freight containers, the residential buildings of the southern Italian harbor town, and, finally, the mountains. The photographer intuitively recognized the complexity of the scene and was fascinated by how landscape and industry coincidentally make up a closed composition. In this work, many characteristics can be found that would become formative for the photographer's oeuvre as a whole. The panoramic perspective, the visual complexity, the simultaneity of overarching structure and detail, and the industrial, technological aesthetic. And yet, Salerno is one of the last pictures that Gursky did not process digitally. From this point onward, he would look for structures, rhythms, and patterns that he could treat using the computer in order to condense them. Bahrain I. Black stripes cross a beige desert landscape, as in an abstract painting. In strange, arbitrary-seeming curves and overlaps, the asphalt strips are placed on the monotonous, dry foundation. In the upper section of the fragmented track, we can make out empty spectator stands in a straight line. Still further in the background, a collection of multi-story buildings can be seen, an indication that this was, at least initially, an actual geographic site. But something unsettling remains. There is no unified perspective. Andreas Gursky assembled the image in 2005 using several shots of the Formula One racetrack in Bahrain that he had taken previously from a helicopter at various angles. Despite all the joy in experimentation, Bahrain I also attests to Gursky's goal of achieving an image of the times. The wealthy desert state with its enormous oil reserves is represented by a race course where both the asphalt and the fuel for cars are obtained from the black gold. Thank you for your visit. In the hope that you enjoyed this brief introduction and that we were able to awaken your curiosity, we'd like you to enjoy discovering further details and immersing yourself in the visual cosmos of Andreas Gursky. We look forward to feedback on our social media platforms and hope you visit us again sometime soon. If you have any other questions or requests relating to the exhibition, please feel free to contact our visitor service.